All right, Matt, welcome in. The Under-23 Asian Cup has begun by the time we're having this conversation on the podcast, but Australia's first game is coming up very shortly. First of all, before we get into the tournament itself, where do you stand on A-League clubs releasing or not releasing players? We talked about this issue last week. Obviously, there's a very patriotic element to Australian football, which I think a lot of people can appreciate. You want to allow players to represent their national team and experience that. But one argument that I posited on probably the devil's advocate side is that the under-23 maybe isn't as precious of an age group as some of the other younger categories. And, a lot of these players are very crucial to what their A-League clubs are doing at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think one thing that's actually pretty obvious about what this setup is here to do is that I think it's just all about trying to grow a collective of Asian countries together to give the players a platform that wouldn't otherwise exist. When you look at every single team in this tournament, and I'll tell you this right now, Lachie, Australia is the only country with multiple foreign players and has easily the most amount of foreign-based players in the competition. What we're looking at is essentially a tournament of B teams, and I think when we look at why an under-23 tournament might be happening outside an Olympic window, I think from a continental perspective, most of it is about essentially blooding in B teams for the national teams, solely with like an international focus. Whereas I think where countries like, two of our opponents in China and Thailand may very well be ruled that way in terms of what they do, Australia it's just not how we operate, right? So with that in mind, I think the selection of the players, honestly, and I'm saying this as someone who obviously follows the Glory quite convincingly, what we've done in obviously letting someone like the situation with sort of Bozanovsky that played out, I think that's someone right there who's not going to be getting his minutes. So go and give him his minutes against the Chinese B team, the Thai B team. It's the right thing to do. Whereas some players that are more valuable, and the names aren't coming to me off the top of my head because it's not what I researched for the segment, but there's obviously been a few who have been told no because you're more valuable to the A-League course. So it's all relative, right? It really is a player-by-player basis.
Yeah, someone like a Max Caputo who, as we're sitting here, a bare hours ago scored the winner for Melbourne City against Brisbane Roar. So you understand the optimism. If I'm understanding you correctly, and just to simplify this for everyone listening as well, so majority of the teams in this tournament will be playing close to a B team for the under-23 age category. So there's a number of players in this age category that are not coming to the competition. No, sorry. When I say B team, I mean, let's imagine that this is the AFC Second 11 Asian Cup. Sure. Okay, so B team to the national team. Yes. Which is where the fact that it's an age category, and I think the approach that teams are taking with it is a bit of a non sequitur. Right. Okay. Interesting. Okay, what do you make of Australia's chances then? Well, again, just really looking at the fact that I did just allude to it there, I think we've obviously are bringing the most foreign experience. So the question essentially of the tournament becomes when you look at, Lewis Agosti, for example, bowling it in the Serie C. Now the pronunciation. He's someone that will just like duck to water, right? If he's good enough to perform at that level, he should be good enough to go up against these players from the Thai League and CSL. That I imagine, because one side of the argument is right. These are players that are coming from these big clubs. Are they the depth of those big clubs, or are these guys that we've just seen Melbourne City face in the Champions League, for example? And when we look at our three group opponents, Iraq, most of their players are from Al Zarawa and Al Shorta. And that to me just says, well, these guys would have been playing in the ACL2 and ACL Elite, surely. Because how the hell do those two clubs have so many players missing? And so that's a big question, right? This entire CSL team out of China, there's a lot of intent in that. I think it's a very personal thing for a country like China, who have just been struggling with all they've put on the table in the sport. They've just not been able to get it right. So I think a tournament. They're okay now because they got the Aussies in charge.
Well, that's a funny little thing you should mention. But for me, like China, this is a tournament where like. It's made for them. Do you know what I mean? Like it's made for them to continue to test their depth, and that is a really big question. Looking around at some of the other groups, I mean, you've got the likes of Group A has Saudi, Jordan, and Vietnam, three countries that all take this level really seriously. You should see the street parades when a country like Vietnam does well in a tournament like this. They once famously made the semi-finals of the U23s and came back to literal like riots and the whole shebang. It's what it's all about in a country like that. Group B is Japan, Qatar, Syria, the UAE, there is so much fight packed in a country like Syria. Again, because this is essentially the second 11 going to play. A team like Syria could be a massive opponent to face. So I guess the thing is, it's actually just a very, very even tournament on its merit. And again, the question becomes more about how they deal with the depth. A good way for the leagues to compare. How does the A League compare with the CSL on its current quality? How does the A League compare, with these big Iraqi teams out of the Champions League? That's the question we're essentially asking here. So I'm thinking, definitely shoe in for quarterfinals. Where you go beyond that, because another thing you have to really understand with the way these tournaments are shaped, right, is take literally any other age group tournament, right? Making the quarterfinal, that's usually the game to qualify for the World Cup. When it's just the quarterfinal, the meaning is different. And how the FA as a body kind of approach that. Do we want to go and grab another piece of Asian silverware? Wouldn't that be massive? It's a big question, but it's certainly, if they have the ambition and the want for it, I think with the squad that's been put out, they can achieve that. Yeah.
Interesting. So is there World Cup qualification for this tournament, or is it that
there's no such thing as the U23 World Cup?
Oh, of course. Okay.
This would usually be the Olympic qualification, right? So this is something I wanted to sort of mention at the start. So you know how AFCON have just had this big controversy where it's going from being held every 2 years to now being held every 4 years. I think something that I think personally, and no disrespect to anyone in the audience who really does have my insight on the game, but I think a lot of people in the audience here with RBA, you are really applying a lot of the European mindset where it's all about, a lot of what goes on in the international scene really doesn't matter. And I think from an Asian perspective, from an African perspective, from our lesser nations across CONCACAF, just that line of thinking, it's just totally different, right? So why you would play the U23s outside of the Olympic window, it's more to do with what the Asian Football Confederation, and if you think as the countries and the national bodies as like stakeholders of this whole body, I think the AFC have come together and said, do you want these national teams competing at U23 level more permanently? And they've all collectively come together and said yes. And so again, I think it's just one of those things where each continent has its own preferences, and there's a lot there that you really have to take into consideration with why a tournament like this is even happening in the first place.
Interesting. Okay. And on the competition, you brought up the idea of like, what does the A-League depth do? This is another theme that's come, like we saw the under-20s when they won their Asian Cup last year. The idea that maybe an Australian curriculum that was brought in 15 years ago, maybe the fact that a lot of younger players are getting more minutes in the A-League really benefited that age group. And you made the comparison with Iraq and the players who maybe even playing continental football. Do you expect that advantage that we saw with the 20s to follow through to this age group? Because we haven't really seen the results from the under-23 age category in recent times.
So, look, obviously it was with another network. It was with FPF, but I very, very religiously followed and went into camp with the U23 team prior to Paris for the simple fact that was a team that was unstoppable under Tony Vidmar initially, and then they got to the tournament. They played that curriculum style, very safe, very defensive style of play. They lost to Indonesia. They drew with Jordan very embarrassingly, and a team that literally looked like one of the best under-23 programs on earth ended up getting grouped at the Asian Cup, right? So that's something that I think is really, it either has to be addressed directly on here at the tournament, like we have to see the Trevor Morgan style as opposed to the Tony Vidmar style. The issue is Vidmar's still the coach. So when we really talk about it being solely like an on-pitch affair, I think that this is really where it's going to come to a head, right? Because again, where Morgan basically had a look at the failures of the U23s, tore up the script and went and won us an Asian Cup, that is the ambition we need to see. They've kept Tony in charge, and by the way, someone that I've personally spoken to and interviewed before, someone that I do have a lot of respect for what he's achieved in his career, but it's just very obvious that with regards to the Paris campaign, it was a very embarrassing failure. That's just the fact. So I would like and I would hope that there has been a very important internal conversation about we actually want to see more of that style that Trevor brought in, and if it can be implemented, and let's not forget, it's Stephen Hall who saved the winning penalty. Lewis Agosti, who I mentioned earlier, another one of the players in the squad that was there for the 20s as well. Those guys can't then go into a program where the national team is playing differently. Well, what does that achieve? Like, it's not we're not caring about the results from an Olympics perspective. So let's go out and play more freely. And that, again, probably one of the bigger questions of the tournament is we're bringing more foreign talent than any other team. Let's try and extrapolate on that. We're bringing this refreshed style that was born into the 20s. We should go and extrapolate on it. But again, with the old regime in charge, it's hard to really say, and that ultimately is the big question here.
Tell you what, one of those foreign-based players I'm really looking forward to seeing is James Overy, the Manchester United fullback. He obviously made a Olyroos camp and was tested out in training and hasn't made his debut yet for the senior team, of course, but he's definitely one earmarked for the future, which is very, very exciting.
Another Trevor Morgan player from that World Cup as well.
Exactly. Yeah, he's been a part of that under-20 success, and he'll hope to build on it in the 23s. Matt, one of my favourite things about doing these little segments with you is that you often have more answers than I have questions to ask you. So a bit more of a broad one. What else should we be paying attention? What are the other talking points heading into this tournament?
Again, it's probably just about the big question of why the tournament is there to be able to develop international football, right? So if we see it more as, it's development for the players and not that bigger picture of what can the Socceroos learn from this, even if there's different personnel involved. What can we take from this tournament to make the next batch of 17s? Let's not forget the 17s are playing 5 World Cups in a row, yeah? So there's just a lot going on in that youth football space. Let's not take the opportunity and look at it as, that question of the players' development, because again, I think when we talk about under 23, I think it's a bit of an oxymoron, because someone who's 23 years old, they're not really a kid anymore. They're not developing. Yeah. They should already be in their prime. And so it's this B team approach. It's this overall approach of the international football program that the 15 other teams in this tournament are going to be playing at. So really, when we're looking at it from which angle, that's where we've got to look at it. And the question then becomes, from an internal perspective within Football Australia, what question are they asking? How are they developing? And their verdict on this and how that comes out, and the playing style, and who those successful players are, what it does for them domestically, that's ultimately going to be our outlook on where we think the curriculum is growing and where we think Australian football is going, right? Let's not forget, though, I think, again, I've already kind of raised it as a point and a big question to ask, but just the actual look of these are players that are appearing continentally in the Asian Champions League. We know how they stack up against, these tired and overworked A-League teams on shoestring budgets in a Champions League context. How do they just stack up when it's straight up the national team? Do you know what I mean? And that's a question where bringing in the Overys, the Agostis, the Stephen Halls, who are in England and Italy, right? That for me becomes so valuable, because it's okay. Well, what we've done is we've kind of cheated, right? It's not an A-League 11. It's not really the B team either. No one can say that, right? But what it is we've essentially taken that look of what a more continental AFC competitive team, that we're facing, and we're kind of pairing it against, that bit of flair we get from players with invaluable experience playing in the Premier League too and things like that. So I think it's just a look of, if you can look at the individual battles, and if you can look at the stats line just in terms of, were we on the front foot in this game? Were we dominant in this game? Did we just go and, really put the foot down against some of Al Zawra and Al Shorter's best talents and guys that are, going to be, well, obviously they don't play directly against Melbourne City because of the conference system, but you know what I mean. Like it's actually a really good comparison to make. How do these Champions League teams compare against, some of these future Socceroos in the future? So even if you look at it from more of a Champions League kind of lens, that's really valuable as well.
It's interesting. I don't really I mentioned off the top, right? The under 23 category, it isn't much of a youth group anymore. And you made the exact same point. And I think what has clicked with me hearing you speak about it, and I think a lot of the listeners will relate to this. We've talked a lot about Melbourne City and their academy and how they play a certain way, they train their players in a certain way, so that when they step up into the first team, that transition is seamless. And I think a lot of the conflict that is potentially going to come, as you say, if if the Tony Popovich way of playing the Socceroos, or even just the Australian way, whatever the Australian way is, right, if that is so different to what Tony Vidmar is doing at the 23s, this is the group of players that is supposedly next on the list to be called up by Tony Popovich, the next batch of stars to be coming through. Obviously, you're not playing your tip top stars. Like Iran Quinda isn't being selected. Jakarta isn't being selected, right? So there's decisions to be made there as well. But the balance between those two different styles is fascinating, and it's going to have longer term implications.
It's actually such a really good way of looking at the players individually while still taking the bigger picture into effect, right? When you look at let's take someone who's 17 years old and they've just signed with Melbourne City, and they go through and their education literally is all about that City platform, and this is how we play at CFG, and they're taught that. And then they go into the national team, and the national team does a similar thing. Here's our curriculum, and this is the style we play. But if they're contrasting, what individually happens in that player's career and in their mind? Do they learn to play a different way? Do they thrive in a way that they didn't think they could with a different style? And that's sort of the beauty of it as well, right? That's the beauty of international football. And whereas you can get all the best teams, and I'm pointing out Iraq so much because they're our direct opponent, right? And they're probably, arguably, could shape up as the better team in Group D, depending how things go. If we look at Iraq and you take all the best players together in Iraq, notice how homogenous that all is. It's all just, this is the Iraqi national team, this is the curriculum, these are how our better teams are playing in the league. And so by being a rare force of being the only team in the tournament that is able to take all of those contrasting styles, put them together, and then have a figurehead in Tony Vidmar who can work with that and weave in the Australian style to the strengths of the players. Such an interesting contrast. So that's where I'm contradicting myself, but I hope I'm still kind of making the point that's, relevant here, is that there is the team side of it, the curriculum side of it, and the administrative side of it. What happens with the individuals, though, is an interesting question. It can't be the only question, because this is not a development tournament. It's a youth tournament, but it's really not. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? Care about the players, but don't make it about the players and the players only.
Okay. So the group stage opponents, Thailand, China, and Iraq on the 8th, 11th, and 14th of January. All those games are played at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Australian time. I'm sure it's broadcast on Paramount or something like that. One of the usual Australian football platforms. It's a 16-team tournament. You play your single round robin, and then the top two from each group go into the quarterfinals. Matt, can they win the darn thing?
Yes. Look, can they win it? I think it's really going to depend on being able to view the other teams more than us. Because I would say right now, yes, we probably are one of the best teams at the tournament, but I'm going off more of the reputation when I talk about Syria being a surprise packet. When I talk about, you've got the Saudi Pro League on our doorstep right here in this tournament. They're obviously going to be good. They've got an Italian coach that they've come in to recruit for the program as well. Like, obviously these teams will be good, but we need to see them on the pitch. Otherwise, yes, we can win it. But it's really going to matter about the here and now when a ball is being kicked. Also, one other thing that I just want to quickly shout out before we finish here, there is an Australian contracted player at another team at this tournament. And I do apologise, because I'm pretty certain a lot of Oz Championship heads and the NPL Victoria fraternity is going to know who this guy is, and I sincerely apologise that I don't. But South Melbourne's Kadir Kador.
Yes.
Yep.
So he was one of the Western players that went to South for the championship.
Okay, yep. Right. Really embarrassing that I don't know that. He is in Lebanon's team for the tournament. So Lebanon, maybe an Aussie angle to take there as well. Lebanon will be in the group with South Korea and the very deadly Central Asian duo of Iran and Uzbekistan. So really, that's the group of death. You don't really give Lebanon much of a chance, but there is the Aussie angle there to take. And again, just in terms of that verdict, let's just wait and see how the whole thing goes, and then we can have the conversation about where is Australian football heading, where's the intent, and is there a point? Even if we come back as U23 champions of Asia, is that something that we can be proud of, like we were with the 20s?
Fascinating. All right, always good chatting to you, Matt, about AFC football. Appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll hear from you again during the tournament.
No worries.